The throne room of the Vraxian hegemony was a cathedral of gold and terror. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows 80 feet overhead, their surfaces inlaid with constellations of conquered worlds. Each star represented a species that had knelt. Each planet marked a civilization that had submitted. The air hung thick with something older than atmosphere, heavier than gravity. The dread pressed against skin and bone like the weight of deep ocean, whispering in a language that predated words. Kneel, kneel, kneel. 17 diplomatic delegations from 17 star systems had already collapsed to their knees, foreheads pressed to marble so polished it reflected their terrified faces. The Terran ambassador beside the human contingent had gone down like a puppet with cut strings, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed silent prayers to gods she'd stopped believing in decades ago. Her hands trembled against the floor. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The chemical weight of submission crushed thought into a single imperative. Garrett Thorne remained standing. His legs felt like iron poured into human shape. His pulse hammered in his temples with the rhythm of artillery fire. Sweat traced cold lines down his spine beneath the formal diplomatic uniform that suddenly felt like a straitjacket. But he'd walked patrol through the Detroit collapse when the city had eaten itself from the inside out. He'd held the perimeter during the New Orleans floods when the water rose higher than hope and the desperate became dangerous. His adrenal system was a weapon forged by 10,000 generations of apex predators who'd learned that submission meant death. The dread pushed against him. His body pushed back. At the far end of the throne room, 20 feet above the crowd, she sat. Empress Ravenna Ashcroft reclined on a throne carved from a single piece of black star metal that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. One impossibly long leg draped over an armrest that could have served as a landing pad. Her armor was golden filigree over a violet bodysuit that clung to muscles capable of shattering stone with casual effort. Each plate had been fitted by artisans who'd spent lifetimes perfecting their craft, etched with patterns that told the history of 1,000 conquered worlds. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall of emeralds, each strand catching the light with an inner luminescence that seemed almost alive. Heavy gold cuffs adorned ears that tapered to elegant points, and her eyes, the color of amethyst held up to dying stars, were filled with nothing but boredom. A court official was reading something. Tribute declarations, tax revenues from systems so far away their light hadn't yet reached this throne room. His voice droned on in the particular monotone of a man who knew no one was actually listening. Every few sentences, he paused for breath, and in those pauses, the silence felt like a physical presence. Garrett wasn't listening. He was doing what he'd done in every hostile negotiation, every tense standoff, every moment when the wrong move meant blood on the floor. Counting exits, noting guard positions, calculating angles of approach. The ceremonial doors behind him, 30 feet of ornate metal that had groaned like dying things when they opened. Two smaller exits flanking the throne dais. Guards at each, wearing crimson armor that marked them as Raven's personal detail. 12 feet tall, minimum, armed with ceremonial spears that probably weren't just ceremonial. Raven yawned. It was a delicate motion, impossibly graceful for someone 15 feet tall. One hand raised to her lips in a gesture that might have been demure, if not for the gold claws extending from her fingertips, each one filed to a point that caught the light like knives waiting to cut. The court official's voice died mid-sentence, the words strangling in his throat. The silence that followed was absolute. How many more? Her voice was like silk dragged over gravel, amplified by the throne's acoustic design to fill every corner of the chamber. The sound rolled through the space like distant thunder, impossible to ignore, impossible to disobey. 12 more petitions, Divine Majesty. The official stammered over the words, his three-fingered hands clutching the data tablet like a drowning man gripping driftwood. I don't care. Raven shifted in her seat, jade locks sliding across gilt pauldrons with a sound like wind through leaves. Where is the Terran delegation? The ambassador beside Garrett made a sound like a wounded animal trying not to draw attention to itself. Her whole body shook. Garrett didn't move. His Marine training held him statue still, even as every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to do anything except stand there while a goddess turned her attention toward him. There. One of Raven's personal guard, a 12-foot Vraxian male in ceremonial crimson, pointed with his spear toward the human contingent. The humans, Divine One thought. Though one appears defective, the word rippled through the court like a stone thrown into still water. Heads turned, even through the crushing weight of the dread, courtiers managed to crane their necks toward the human still standing, while everyone else knelt. Whispers started, then died as Raven leaned forward. For the first time in what was probably decades, genuine curiosity flickered across her face. It transformed her features from divine marble into something almost human, almost vulnerable. Stand. The command rolled out like a wave. The other delegates rose like marionettes on strings, movements jerky and uncoordinated. The Terran ambassador swayed on her feet, eyes glazed and empty. She'd stopped crying. That was worse somehow. The tears had been human. This vacancy was something else entirely. Raven's violet gaze fixed on Garrett, and he felt the full weight of her attention like a physical blow. Why do you not kneel? His throat was dry. The dread pressed against him like a physical force, trying to drive him down to the marble floor where he belonged, where every other intelligent species in known space belonged when they stood before the Empress of the Vraxian hegemony. Every instinct from a million years of human evolution screamed at him. Run, fight, freeze. His body couldn't decide which, so it did all three at once, muscles locking, heart racing, skin flushing cold, then hot, then cold again. He chose honesty, because you haven't earned it. The throne room went silent. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shot, that crystalline moment when everyone realizes violence is no longer theoretical, but inevitable. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Raven stood. The motion was fluid despite her size, despite the armor that probably weighed more than Garrett's entire body. The plates chimed softly against each other, a sound like distant bells. She descended the throne steps with the grace of a dancer and the inevitability of an avalanche. Each footfall echoed like a drumbeat, like a countdown. Courtiers scrambled backward, clearing a path, pressing themselves against walls and columns. Some of them were still crying. Others had gone completely blank, their minds unable to process what they were witnessing. She stopped 3 feet from Garrett. At her full height, he barely came up to her breastplate. The golden filigree was etched with scenes of conquest, entire species reduced to decorative patterns. Up close, he could see that her violet skin had a faint luminescence, bioluminescent markers that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her gem-colored eyes looked down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not anger, something else. You think yourself brave, little thing? Her voice had dropped to something almost intimate, almost gentle, a tone she might use with a favored pet. Or simply broken? Neither. His voice didn't shake. Forward recon in Detroit had taught him that fear was information, not instruction. The body sends signals. The mind chooses what to do with them. I'm just not wired for submission. Something flickered in those purple depths. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. She inhaled deeply, her massive chest rising, and Garrett saw her pupils dilate. The dread intensified, becoming a physical pressure that made his ears ache, his vision narrow at the edges. He'd read the briefing materials. Command pheromones, airborne neurochemicals that hijack the limbic system, flooding it with synthetic submissiveness. Dozens of species had fallen to the Vraxian hegemony without a single shot fired, their soldiers dropping weapons and kneeling before they even understood why. But humans had evolved alongside persistence predators and apex carnivores. They'd learned to run 40 miles through African heat to chase down prey that was faster, stronger, better armed by nature. They'd learned to fight through fear or die. His adrenal glands recognized a threat and dumped cortisol into his bloodstream. Not submission chemicals, fight-or-flight hormones, the kind that turned ordinary men into heroes or monsters depending on which choice they made in the next 3 seconds. Garrett chose fight. Raven reached for him, one massive hand extended as if to cup his chin, the gesture almost tender despite the gold claws that could pierce his skull like tissue paper. It was the kind of touch a queen might offer a loyal subject, the kind that said, "You belong to me now." Garrett moved. Second one. He dropped into a low slide, using the polished marble to his advantage, every hour of combat training condensing into pure muscle memory. He passed under her reaching arm with inches to spare, close enough to smell the ozone scent of her skin, close enough to see the microscopic scales in her armor plating. Second two, he pivoted on his back and drove his boot into the back of her right knee, not hard enough to injure because that would mean execution for sure, but precisely targeting the joint mechanics. The briefing had been specific about Vraxian physiology, humanoid body plan, same basic skeletal structure, same vulnerable points. Her leg buckled. Physics didn't care about size. Leverage was leverage. Mass times distance divided by fulcrum point equals mechanical advantage. Second three, he rode her fall, using her momentum to propel himself upward like a surfer catching a wave. His left hand snatched the ceremonial dagger from her belt. More decoration than weapon, probably, but the blade was sharp enough to catch light, sharp enough to cut. He landed on her chest as she hit the marble with a sound like a gong being struck, the impact echoing through the throne room. The dagger's point hovered 1 millimeter from the soft tissue just below her jaw, right where the pulse throbbed against Violet's skin. Raven's eyes were wide, not with fear, with shock. The throne room was frozen. Guards had weapons half drawn, energy crackling along spear tips, but none dared fire with their empress beneath him. Courtiers stood like statues, some with hands still raised in interrupted gestures. Even the dread seemed to have evaporated, replaced by something unprecedented. Silence. Pure, absolute silence, broken only by the sound of Garrett's breathing. His breathing was steady. His hand didn't shake. The dagger stayed exactly where he'd placed it, the point dimpling her skin without breaking it. Beneath him, he felt Raven's heart hammering against his knees, a deep, resonant percussion that seemed to shake his bones. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, armor plates shifting with each breath. Well, she whispered. And now there was something new in her voice, something Garrett couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not even indignation, almost like wonder. This is unexpected. The containment cell was a masterpiece of paranoia. Walls of reinforced titanium alloy formed a cube 15 feet per side, large enough to pace in, small enough to feel like a coffin after the first hour. One wall was transparent aluminum 6 inches thick, the kind they used in deep space observation posts where the pressure differential could crush a human body into paste. Through it, Garrett could see a viewing gallery where distant figures moved like shadows through frosted glass. He'd been here 3 days. They'd fed him twice, sliding protein bars and water through a slot that opened for exactly 5 seconds before slamming shut again. No one had spoken to him. The silence was worse than interrogation. It gave him too much time to think, to replay those 3 seconds over and over, to wonder if he'd just committed suicide by Empress. He was doing push-ups when she arrived. The first indication was the sound, a rhythmic impact of footfalls that shook dust from the ceiling joints, each step deliberate and heavy. The shadows in the gallery scattered like startled birds. Then she filled the viewing window, and Garrett understood why the cell was sized the way it was. Built for her, for visits like this. Raven stood in the gallery wearing a fitted violet bodysuit without the ceremonial armor. Her jade mane was pulled back in a practical braid. The gold cuffs still adorned her ears, but everything else about her was simpler, more vulnerable. She pressed one massive hand against the transparent aluminum, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You're not dead." Her voice came through speakers embedded in the walls, slightly tinny but clear. Garrett finished his set before responding. 37, 38, 39, 40. He stood and grabbed his shirt from the corner, using it to wipe sweat from his face. The shirt was starting to smell. 3 days in the same clothes would do that. Disappointed? She paused, her head tilting in a gesture that was distinctly human despite her alien features. "I don't know. The High Chancellor wanted you executed immediately." I told him no. "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, those jeweled eyes tracking his movements as he went through a cool-down stretch. His shoulder was stiff from sleeping on the metal bench. His back ached, but he'd been in worse situations. Detroit had been worse. The floods had been worse. At least here, he knew where the enemy was. "Because you looked at me." Her palm pressed harder against the transparent aluminum, hard enough that the material creaked in its frame. "Everyone looks at you." "No," her voice was sharp. "They look at the Empress, the divine vessel, the Golden Death. You looked at me." Garrett met her gaze steadily. And what did you see when I looked at you? Her laugh was bitter, a sound like breaking glass. A woman who's been bored for 73 years. 73 years. Garrett filed that away. The briefing had estimated Vraxian lifespans at 2 to 3 centuries, but specifics were scarce. The hegemony didn't share medical data. If she was 73 and looked like she was in her physical prime, she could live another 200 years. 200 years of sitting on that throne, watching courtiers kneel, feeling nothing. He approached the transparent wall. Even this close, the dread was absent. Whatever neurochemical cocktail she produced had zero effect on his physiology. It was like being immune to tear gas, like watching everyone else choke while you breathe clean air. Why doesn't it work? Raven asked suddenly. My royal command. Every species in the known galaxy submits. Even the Krillith hive mind felt compulsion. But you. She trailed off, studying him with an intensity that felt almost clinical. Why? You want the scientific explanation or the historical one? Both. Garrett leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The metal was cold against his back. Scientifically, your pheromones target the limbic system, specifically the amygdala and hypothalamus. They trigger submission responses through chemical mimicry of natural subordination markers that most species evolved as part of their social structures. But humans evolved on a death world. Death world. She repeated the words like she was tasting them. Earth, 0.7 gravity heavier than Vraxian standard. Atmosphere that's borderline corrosive compared to most habitable planets. Megafauna that hunted us for 4 million years. He watched her face, gauging comprehension. We didn't survive by submitting to predators. We survived by killing them, by learning to throw rocks and fashion spears and coordinate in packs, by becoming the thing that hunted the hunters. Raven's expression shifted, something between fascination and horror. Our adrenal system evolved as an override, Garrett continued. When we detect a threat, chemical or physical or psychological, we don't freeze or submit. We fight or run. Your command pheromones register as a threat, so my body dumps cortisol and adrenaline into my system. Fight or flight response. Submission never enters the equation. It's not that I'm resisting your power. My biology doesn't recognize it as power, just danger. She was silent, processing. Her hand hadn't left the transparent aluminum. The skin light beneath her surface pulsed faster now, betraying emotion her face tried to hide. The historical answer. He offered, please. 10,000 years ago, my ancestors were being hunted by cave lions and dire wolves, predators that made your personal guard look small. We learned to throw rocks hard enough to crack skulls, fashion spears sharp enough to pierce hide. We learned to coordinate in groups, to communicate complex tactics, to pass knowledge down through generations. He pushed off the wall, closing the distance until only 6 inches of transparent aluminum separated them. We learned that the alpha predator only stays alpha until something sharper comes along. We learned that gods bleed. Raven's pupils dilated, her breathing had quickened, the bodysuit rising and falling with each breath. You're the first real thing I've encountered in decades. Real? Everyone else's. She gestured vaguely with her free hand, a gesture that encompassed the throne room, the palace, probably the entire hegemony. Glazed, compliant. They agree with everything I say, anticipate my desires before I voice them. I could order them to walk off a cliff and they'd smile while doing it. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Do you understand what it's like to be surrounded by puppets? To have every conversation be a performance, where you already know all the lines. Garrett thought of the ambassador, tears streaming down her face as the dread crushed her into submission. Lonely. Yes, the word came out as a breath. Raven pressed her forehead against the transparent aluminum, and from this close, Garrett could see the faint shimmer of subcutaneous glow beneath her skin, patterns that shifted with her pulse. Her eyes closed. I could have you killed. I should have you killed. You attacked me, held a blade to my throat. By every law of the hegemony, every precedent of divine rule, you should be torn apart in the execution plaza. But you won't. No. She opened her eyes, and in them, Garrett saw something he hadn't expected. Hunger. Not sexual, though there was an edge of that too. Something primal and undeniable. This was the hunger of someone starving in a banquet hall, surrounded by food they couldn't taste. Because you're the only one who can tell me I'm wrong. Her hand slid down the transparent aluminum, fingers splayed. After a moment, Garrett placed his own hand against the barrier, palm to palm. His hand fit entirely within her palm print, his fingers not even reaching to where hers ended. "What are you thinking?" Raven asked. "That you're not wrong," Garrett said quietly. "And that terrifies you more than anything." She didn't deny it. The second visit came on the fourth morning, just after they'd slid a protein bar through the slot. Garrett had learned to grab the food fast before the mechanism slammed shut. He'd nearly lost a finger the first time, pulling back just in time to hear metal crash against metal with enough force to sever bone. He was halfway through the bar when he heard her footsteps. Slower this time, more hesitant. When she appeared in the viewing gallery, she was wearing the same violet bodysuit, but her forest-colored locks were loose now, falling around her shoulders in waves that had caught the light. No gold cuffs on her ears. She looked younger somehow, less like an empress, more like a woman who'd been carrying weight for too long. "They said you've been pacing." Raven's voice came through the speakers. "The guards, they monitor the cell. They said you walk for hours, counting steps, mapping the space." Old habit. Garrett set down the protein bar. Forward recon training, know your environment, count exits, calculate angles, never be caught without a plan. Even when there's nowhere to go, especially then. He stood, moving to the transparent wall. The illusion of action is better than paralysis. Keeps the mind sharp, keeps the body ready. Raven nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. 73 years of keeping sharp for enemies that never come. Staying ready for challenges that no one dares make." She pressed both hands against the aluminum now, leaning forward until her forehead almost touched the barrier. "Do you know what I did yesterday? Tell me." "I sat through 6 hours of tribute presentations from the Meridian systems. Their representatives brought me gifts, platinum sculptures, rare gemstones, a living specimen of their planet's apex predator, genetically modified to be docile." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They killed everything dangerous about it, made it safe, made it boring, and I smiled and accepted their offerings and told them how pleased I was. And all I could think was that I wanted to throw every sculpture through a window, wanted to release the predator just to see if it would attack me, wanted to feel anything except this crushing, endless boredom." Garrett watched her carefully. "Why don't you?" "Because I'm the Empress. Because I have responsibilities. Because 1,000 worlds depend on the stability I provide." She straightened, hands dropping from the aluminum. "Because I don't know how to be anything else." "That's a choice you're making." "Is it?" Her eyes flashed. "I was born with these pheromones. Born into this role. The first time I can remember, I was 3 years old and my mother was teaching me how to modulate my command presence so I wouldn't accidentally kill our servants with too much intensity." 3 years old, Garrett. "I've been a weapon my entire life. Where's the choice in that? The choice is in what you do with it now." Garrett moved closer to the barrier. "You could change the system, rule differently, find a way to control the pheromones instead of letting them control you. I can't turn them off. They're autonomic, like breathing. Then learn to hold your breath." She stared at him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside the cell, somewhere in the palace depths, machinery hummed. Water cycled through pipes. The enormous structure breathed around them. "Why do you care?" Raven finally asked. "Why waste breath trying to convince me to change? You're going to die soon anyway. The High Chancellor invokes the law of divine insult tomorrow. I can't stop it without undermining my own authority, because everyone deserves the chance to be more than what they were built to be." Garrett's voice was steady. "Human, Vraxian, doesn't matter. We're all born with things we didn't choose. The only question is what we choose to do about it." Raven's hand came up to touch the aluminum again, fingers tracing patterns against the transparent surface. "I've ordered thousands of deaths, commanded entire fleets to burn worlds that resisted, sat on my throne and felt their fear wash over me like perfume. And I felt nothing." She met his eyes. "But the thought of you dying, that," she swallowed hard. "That I feel. What do you feel? Fear? Loss? Something I don't have words for in any language." Her living tattoos were pulsing rapidly now, giving her skin an almost feverish glow. "You've been here 3 days, we've spoken twice, and you're more real to me than anyone I've known in 73 years. Garrett pressed his palm to the aluminum where her hand rested. I'm sorry. For what? For making you feel something when you can't do anything about it. She was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it through the speakers, she said, Don't be sorry. This is the first time in decades I've felt alive. High Chancellor Thane Corvus moved through the palace corridors like a specter in silver robes that seemed to drink light from the air around him. At 13 feet, he was tall even by Vraxian standards, but his build was slender, almost delicate, like a blade that had been honed too many times. Cybernetic implants gleamed at his temples, neural processors that gave his eyes an unsettling glow when the light hit them right. He'd been the second most powerful person in the hegemony for 40 years, and he'd spent 30 of those years planning how to become the first. The guards outside Garrett's containment cell snapped to attention as he approached. Their ceremonial spears crossed over their chests in salute. Perfect synchronization. Perfect obedience. Everything in the palace was perfect. Everything except the human. Leave us. Thane's command was soft but absolute. The guards obeyed instantly, of course. Even without royal command pheromones, Thane had spent a century cultivating fear through more traditional methods. Intelligence networks, strategic disappearances, a reputation for remembering every slight, every hesitation, every moment of less than absolute loyalty. He activated the cell's viewing window. The human was doing exercises again, some repetitive motion that involved gripping the upper door frame and pulling himself upward over and over. Primitive, but Thane supposed that was what one expected from a species that still used chemical propellants in their weapons. Impressive, Thane said into the intercom. For a meat-driven biological, at least. The human dropped from his grip, landing in a crouch that spoke of military training. He turned, and Thane noted the absence of fear in those eyes. Interesting. Most beings who looked at Thane saw death. This one saw an obstacle. Chancellor. The human's voice was level, respectful but not submissive. You know who I am. Your picture was in the briefing materials, right under the heading Secondary Threat Assessment. Secondary. Thane's jaw tightened. How droll. I came to thank you, actually, for providing the final variable in an equation I've been solving for 30 years. He pulled a small device from his robes. A crystalline sphere no larger than a marble, suspended in a silver cage by hairline wires that vibrated with barely contained energy. The sphere pulsed with its own internal light, colors shifting through the spectrum too fast for organic eyes to track. Do you know what this is? I'm sure you're about to tell me. A neuro-D dampener. Prototype, of course. Thane held it up to the light where it refracted into rainbow patterns that painted the walls. I've been developing it in secret since I first understood the nature of the Empress's control. Royal Command pheromones operate on a specific frequency, a neurochemical signature that induces submission in every known species. He smiled. Every species but yours, apparently. The human's expression didn't change, but Thane saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Good. Let him understand. My device broadcasts an inverse frequency, Thane continued, canceling the effect, like noise-canceling audio technology, but for biochemical signals. The theory was sound years ago, but I could never calibrate it properly. The pheromone signature varied too much, responding to the Empress's emotional state in ways I couldn't predict. He turned the sphere, watching light dance across its surface. Then you attacked her. The human waited. When you held that blade to her throat, something fascinating happened. Thane's smile widened. Her body released a concentrated burst of royal command, pure, undiluted by conscious control. A stress response, I suppose. That spike of intensity allowed me to finally map the full spectrum of the pheromone signature. So thank you, little human. You've catalyzed a revolution. You're going to use it on her during tomorrow's coronation ceremony. Thane pocketed the device. In front of every noble house, every vassal kingdom, every species bound to the hegemony, I will show them that their goddess is merely a biological accident, that her divinity is chemistry, nothing more. He watched the human's face for reaction, and when the veil drops, when they see her as she truly is, a tired woman who's been playing dress-up for 73 years, they will turn to someone who offers real control. Technological control, predictable, efficient, rational. So you're staging a coup. I'm ushering in a new age. Thane's eyes gleamed. Biological rule is obsolete. We've been slaves to pheromones and instinct for too long. He gestured at the containment cell. Even you, immune to her command, are still just an animal responding to stimuli. Fight or flight. How primitive, how limiting. The human crossed his arms. If you're so confident, why tell me? Because, my dear human, you're going to be executed in 6 hours. Thane checked a chronometers on his wrist. The Empress tried to intervene. Bless her hearts. But I cited the ancient law of divine insult. When one strikes the Empress, the penalty is death. No exceptions, no mercy. Even she cannot override precedent without risking her legitimacy. And she values her precious legitimacy more than your life. The human said nothing, just watched, calculating. I suppose I'm being sentimental. Thane turned toward the door. You're the only one who might appreciate the elegance of my plan, the irony that the Empress's own protectiveness toward you sealed her fate. She tried to save you, you see, quite passionately, argued with the High Council for hours, which of course only proves my point. She's compromised, sentimental, weak. Thane's smile was a knife's edge. In 6 hours, you'll be dead. In 12, she'll be deposed. And in 24, I will have remade the galaxy into something rational, something clean, something free from the tyranny of biological imperative. The door sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurized air. Thane walked away humming something that might have been a funeral dirge or a victory song. Behind him in the cell, the human stood very still for a long time. Then he started doing push-ups again. 1, 2, 3, counting under his breath. Planning. The execution plaza was an amphitheater carved from white marble that could hold 50,000 spectators. Every seat was filled. Holographic displays projected the scene to billions across the hegemony's conquered worlds. The image quality so perfect it was like being there, like feeling the morning sun on your face and the marble under your feet and the terrible anticipation in the air. They'd brought Garrett out in traditional chains, ornate things of ceremonial silver that probably weighed more than he did. Each link was etched with prayers in dead languages, invocations to gods that had been conquered along with their worshippers. 4 guards flanked him, ceremonial spears held at attention, their crimson armor polished to mirror brightness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the plaza's center, where an execution platform rose like an altar. High Chancellor Thane stood at the platform's edge, resplendent in silver robes that caught the light like liquid mercury. Behind him, arranged in a semicircle, stood the High Court. Representatives from every major species in the hegemony, their faces ranging from bored indifference to eager anticipation. This was entertainment. This was justice. This was theater. Raven was absent. Garrett noted this with a fraction of his attention. The rest was focused on the small device the Chancellor held, the crystalline sphere in its silver cage now mounted on an ornate staff like a holy relic. It pulsed with internal light, colors shifting faster than heartbeats. The crowd's murmur built like the approach of a storm, 50,000 voices blending into a sound like distant thunder. Guards took position around the platform. Energy weapons hummed to life. Everything was ceremony. Everything was pageantry. Everything was perfectly, precisely orchestrated. People of the hegemony. Thane's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by acoustics so sophisticated they made his words seem to come from everywhere at once, from the air itself. Today, we witness justice. The human Garrett Thorne, guilty of divine insult, will face the Empress's judgment. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the moment stretch. But first, I believe our divine Empress should preside over this ceremony. On cue, the royal doors at the plaza's far end groaned open on hinges that had been built to last millennia. Raven emerged wearing her full ceremonial armor, sun metal plates over violet bodysuit, verdant mane cascading down her back like a waterfall of gemstones. The armor caught sunlight and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. She walked with the measured pace of ritual, each footfall echoing across the marble like a countdown. But Garrett saw what the crowd didn't. Her hands were trembling, so faint that anyone farther than 10 feet away would miss it, but her fingers shook against the gold plating of her armor. She ascended the platform, taking her position at its center, and the crowd began their traditional prostration. 50,000 beings dropping to their knees in perfect synchronization, a wave of submission rolling across the amphitheater like dominoes falling. Thane smiled. Divine majesty. His voice dripped with false reverence, each word coated in honey that barely disguised the poison beneath. Before we proceed with the execution, I have a gift, a token of loyalty from your faithful servant. He raised the staff. The crystalline sphere began to glow, intensifying from a dim pulse to blazing radiance. Garrett felt it immediately, a change in air pressure like the drop before a lightning strike. Around him, the guards' eyes cleared. The glazed devotion that had marked their expressions for as long as they could remember evaporated like morning fog under sudden sun, replaced by confusion, then recognition, then horror. In the stands, 50,000 voices shifted from adoration to uncertainty. The change moved through the crowd like wind through wheat, a visible wave of people blinking, shaking their heads, looking around as if waking from a dream they couldn't quite remember having. What? Raven's voice cracked in the single syllable. She looked out at the crowd, and for the first time in 73 years, she saw them seeing her. Not the Empress, not the divine vessel. Just a woman in golden armor who'd spent a lifetime controlling them through chemical manipulation they'd never consented to, never even known about. The crowd's murmur turned ugly. She's been poisoning us. Someone shouted, the voice amplified by the plaza's acoustics until it seemed to come from everywhere. Mind control. Another voice. Tyrant. A third. Raven staggered backward. Her jeweled eyes were wide, pupils dilated in panic. The dread, that automatic aura of her presence, had evaporated. The chemical weight that had pressed down on every gathering for 7 decades was simply gone. She was just a person. Overwhelmingly powerful physically, yes, but stripped of the mystique that had made her untouchable. Stripped of the only power that had ever really mattered. The guards turned their weapons on her. Seize the false empress, Thane commanded, and his voice carried absolute authority now. The authority of a man who'd spent 40 years preparing for this moment. Garrett moved. The ceremonial chains were beautiful but poorly designed. More theater than security. Garrett had spent 3 hours the previous night working a microfracture into the third link, using the sharp edge of his bench to stress the metal in exactly the right place. They'd searched him for weapons, but never considered his cell's furniture. The chains shattered with a sound like breaking glass. He slammed his shoulder into the nearest guard, driving him into the second. The impact sent both sprawling across white marble. The third swung with his spear, energy crackling along its blade. Garrett ducked under the arc, grabbed the shaft, and used the guard's own momentum to send him sprawling over the platform's edge. The fourth guard was faster, getting his weapon up, but Garrett had already snatched a handful of the broken chain. He whipped it outward. The silver links wrapped around the spear's blade, and he yanked hard, pulling the guard off balance. A knee to the solar plexus finished it. The whole sequence took 6 seconds. On the platform, Raven was surrounded. A dozen guards with weapons raised, energy building to lethal charge. Behind them, Thane wore his triumphant smile like a crown he'd just stolen. Empress. Garrett's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. She turned. Their eyes met across 30 feet of marble. He saw it happen in real time, the moment she shifted from panic to calculation. Her purple stare focused, narrowed, her breathing steadied. She'd been combat trained her whole life, he realized, physically superior to anyone on this platform. But she'd spent so long relying on pheromones that she'd forgotten how to fight without them. Forgotten what her own body could do when chemistry wasn't doing the work for her. Gravity waste chute, Garrett shouted. 3 o'clock, 20 meters. He didn't wait to see if she understood. He was already running, zigzagging through the confusion of guards, still reeling from the dampener's effect. Laser fire scorched the marble behind him, close enough to feel the heat. He heard Raven move, a massive impact as she swept 3 guards aside with one armored arm. The sound of bodies hitting marble. Then she was running too, her strides covering 3 times his distance, armor plates ringing like bells with each footfall. The waste chute was exactly where the maintenance schematic said it would be, a 2-meter diameter opening with a steel grate. Industrial refuse disposal for an amphitheater this size required major infrastructure. Garrett hit the grate first, fingers finding purchase in the diamond pattern, and ripped it open through sheer adrenaline-fueled strength. The metal shrieked, his shoulders screamed. The chute dropped into darkness, vanishing into the palace's sub-level systems like a throat waiting to swallow them whole. Raven crashed into the space beside him, armor ringing like a cathedral tium, energy weapons carved chunks from the marble around them, superheated stones spraying like shrapnel. She looked down the chute, then at him, and for a frozen moment he thought she might refuse, might choose to face execution with dignity rather than flee like a common criminal. Then she laughed. It was a wild sound, unhinged and utterly genuine. The laugh of someone who'd spent 73 years performing and had just decided to stop. This is insane. You have a better idea? No. She was still laughing, a sound that was half terror and half liberation. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw something he'd never seen before. Choice. Pure, undiluted choice. Not command, not duty, just the raw decision to do something because she wanted to. They jumped together. The chute was a vertical tunnel lined with friction pads designed to slow falling debris. It failed spectacularly at slowing a 15-foot Vraxian in full armor. Raven became an avalanche, plummeting past Garrett in a shower of sparks as her armor scraped the walls. He tucked into a tight roll, using the friction pads to control his descent, while she dropped like a golden meteor. The sound of her fall echoed up the shaft, a descending roar that promised catastrophic impact. 3 seconds of falling. 3 seconds to wonder if they'd just chosen a faster way to die. The impact basin at the bottom was reinforced polymer designed to absorb tons of industrial waste. It absorbed Raven with a catastrophic crunch, the polymer cratering under her weight and momentum. Garrett hit a moment later, rolling to distribute force across his back and shoulders. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Stars exploded across his vision. But he'd survived worse drops in Detroit when buildings collapsed and you rode the rubble down because standing still meant getting buried. Above them, voices echoed down the chute. Authoritative. Urgent. Coming fast. Move. Garrett hissed, already rolling to his feet. His ankle protested, twisted but not broken. His shoulder felt like someone had driven a spike through it. Details to worry about later. They were in a processing chamber, automated conveyors frozen mid-cycle, sorting mechanisms dark and silent. The air smelled of ozone and decay, that particular combination of old machinery and older neglect. Maintenance tunnels branched off in 3 directions, dark mouths leading deeper into the palace's forgotten infrastructure. Garrett grabbed Raven's arm and pulled. She stumbled after him, still disoriented from the fall. They vanished into the tunnels as laser fire stitched the chamber behind them, superheated plasma turning polymer to slag. The Undercity was a world of rust and shadow. Maintenance tunnels gave way to abandoned industrial sectors, the bones of old Vraxian infrastructure from before the hegemony expanded beyond this planet. Massive gears hung motionless in the darkness, their teeth larger than Garrett's entire body. Coolant pipes dripped neon blue fluid that hissed when it hit the floor. Everything smelled of ozone and decay and the particular emptiness of places where no one had walked in decades. Garrett found a service alcove 50 meters into the maze and pulled Raven inside. The space was barely large enough for her, but it was shadowed, defensible, off the main passage. She collapsed against the wall, armor scraping metal with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Her breathing was erratic, rapid, shallow gasps that reminded Garrett of combat shock. Her hands were shaking. When she tried to speak, nothing came out but a whimper. "Hey." He touched her arm, that massive thing that, even in the dim emergency lighting, showed the tremor running through it. "Look at me." She couldn't. Her violet gaze was unfocused, staring at nothing, at everything at the inside of her own head where something was breaking. "Empress," he said it firmly. "Ravenna." Her name broke through. She blinked, eyes focusing on him like a drowning person spotting a lifeline. "I can't." The words came out broken, each syllable fractured. "I can't feel them. The court, the guards, anyone. It's like being blind. I've always felt their devotion, their fear, their love. It was like breathing. I didn't even think about it. It was just there, this constant feedback telling me where everyone was, what they felt, how they saw me." She pressed both hands to her head, fingers tangling in jade locks. What if Thane's right? What if I'm nothing without it? Garrett had seen this before. Forward recon teams sometimes encountered combatants who'd relied too heavily on tech augmentation. Soldiers who'd replaced parts of themselves with machinery until the line between human and hardware blurred. When the tech failed, when an EMP knocked out their neural links or their augments got damaged, they panicked. The key was grounding them in immediate physical reality, giving them something concrete to focus on when their world had just been stripped of everything familiar. He grabbed her wrist. His fingers couldn't even circle it completely. He pulled her hand toward his chest, pressing her massive palm flat against his sternum through the thin fabric of his shirt. "What are you doing?" "Quiet. Feel." She could feel his heartbeat. It was fast but steady, a regular rhythm that had no fear in it. No panic, just the elevated pulse of someone who'd been running and fighting and was ready to do more of both. His ribcage expanded and contracted with breath that was deeper than hers. Slower, more controlled. "Match my breathing," he said. "In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. She tried. Her first breath was a ragged gasp that hitched in her throat. Again, slowly. She tried again. This time the breath was smoother, still shaky but following the pattern. Her massive chest rose and fell, armor plates shifting with the motion. Her heartbeat, he could feel it through her palm pressed against him. A deep bass thrum, like standing too close to artillery fire. It began to slow. 3 minutes. That's how long they stayed like that, her hand on his chest, his hand steadying hers, while the undercity dripped and hummed around them. Emergency lighting painted everything amber. Water somewhere in the distance ran through pipes that groaned like dying things. The air was thick enough to taste metallic and wrong, but it was breathable. It was survival. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough but coherent. "You're not afraid of me." "No, why?" He chose his words carefully, "because you're choosing how to respond instead of letting biology decide. That takes more strength than ruling through chemistry ever did." She studied him in the emergency lighting. Her pulse glow was still too fast, but slowing. "You're very strange, Garrett. Comes with the species." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, then vanished. "I don't know how to be anything but Empress. I've ruled for 73 years, and now you're Ravenna." He squeezed her wrist gently. "Just Raven. Start there." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "Then, I think I'm going to die down here." "Not on my watch. You're very confident for someone who's 5'10" and currently trapped in the maintenance tunnels of a planet that wants you dead." Garrett smiled. It was a sharp expression, edged with dark humor. "Raven, I held perimeter in Detroit when the city was eating itself. I've survived 3 near-death experiences before breakfast, more times than I can count. This," he gestured at the rusty walls, "this is just another Tuesday." She laughed. It was weak but genuine. Then her stomach growled. The sound was seismic, a deep rumble that echoed off the metal walls like a minor landslide. Raven's eyes widened in mortification. Subcutaneous shimmer flaring bright with what he was pretty sure was the Vraxian equivalent of blushing. "When did you last eat?" "This morning before the—" She trailed off. 6 hours ago, 6 hours. Garrett did quick math. Vraxian metabolism was roughly 3 times human baseline, according to the briefing. Their larger mass and higher activity level required proportionally more calories. 6 hours for her was like 18 for him. "You're going to crash." "I'll be fine." "No, you won't." He stood, scanning the alcove. "Your metabolism is already in deficit. In another hour, you'll start experiencing tremors, cognitive impairment, motor control issues. In 3 hours, you'll lose consciousness." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I've done mission planning against Vraxian targets. I've read your medical literature, studied your biology, calculated caloric requirements for combat scenarios." He met her gaze. "I know you need protein. Lots of it, and we're going to find some in the Undercity." "In the Undercity?" Her voice carried disbelief. "There's nothing here but rust and decay. There's always something to hunt." He checked the tunnel outside the alcove, listening. Even in hell, Raven struggled to her feet, armor creaking. She towered over him, even when exhausted, even when her world had just collapsed. "You're going to hunt for me? I'm going to hunt for us. You're no good to me if you pass out." He started moving down the corridor, and after a moment, she followed. "Besides, I've been living on nutrient paste for 3 days. I could use real food, too." They walked in silence for several minutes, navigating by emergency lighting. The Undercity spread out like a metal labyrinth, endless corridors branching into abandoned workshops and processing chambers that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Rust covered everything in shades of orange and brown. Coolant leaked from ceiling pipes, forming pools of neon that reflected their passage. The air was thick, wrong, but survivable. Garrett moved with practiced quiet, every step deliberate. He'd found a piece of rebar in the alcove and carried it now like a short staff. Primitive, but better than nothing. His eyes constantly scanned, processing, cataloging, guard positions in case they were followed, choke points, defensible spaces, exit routes. "Can I ask you something?" Raven's voice was soft. "Sure, why did you save me in the plaza? You could have escaped during the confusion. Slipped away while everyone was focused on me." Garrett didn't answer immediately. He was listening, tracking echoes, filtering ambient noise from the drip of water and groan of settling metal. There was something ahead, something moving through the darkness with purpose. "Because," he said finally, "everyone deserves the chance to be more than what they were built to be." Before she could respond, he held up a hand. "Stop." 50 meters ahead, something growled. It was a sound like grinding metal mixed with biological fury, deep and resonant and distinctly predatory. In the darkness beyond the emergency lights, two eyes reflected green. "What is that?" Raven whispered. Garrett smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Dinner." The sewer stalker emerged from shadows like a nightmare-given form. 6 legs, each ending in claws that sparked against metal as it moved. Scales the color of oil slicks covering a body the size of a Terran rhinoceros. Its head was wedge-shaped, designed for battering through obstacles, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of crystalline teeth that had evolved to crack open industrial waste containers. It had probably been feeding on discarded materials for years, growing fat on the refuse of the palace above. Raven took an involuntary step backward. "That thing is enormous. About 1,200 pounds. Garrett was already moving sideways, circling. Apex predator of the Undercity, scavenger mostly, but territorial. We're in its hunting ground." The stalker tracked him with intelligent eyes, head lowering in a threat display. Its growl deepened, resonating in the confined space until Garrett could feel it in his chest. "Garrett, we should run." "No." He didn't take his eyes off the creature. "Running triggers prey drive. Besides, you need protein. That thing is 800 pounds of edible meat." Raven stepped forward, and he saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. Combat training surfacing through decades of relying on pheromones. She analyzed the battlefield in a heartbeat. The loose floor panel to the left. The cable coiled near the overhead beam. The stalker's vulnerable points. Her gaze met his, and in it, he saw decision crystallizing. "I have a plan." Her voice was sharp with command, with choice. "Garrett, can you set a snare at neck height?" He looked at the cable, the beam, understood immediately. "On it." While he worked, looping cable around the support beam, Raven positioned herself. The stalker cleared its eyes, shaking its massive head. It spotted her now, the larger target, the obvious threat. It charged again, slower this time, more cautious, but still with enough momentum to crush bone. Raven ran directly at it. It was the insane part, the calculation that separated predators from prey. The willingness to charge toward danger because the math said it was optimal. Her armor made her heavy, but it also made her a battering ram. She dropped into a slide at the last second, impossibly graceful for something so large, and her armored elbow drove into the stalker's rear leg joint as it passed over her. The impact disrupted its balance. The stalker stumbled forward, directly into the cable snare Garrett had positioned. The cable caught it at neck height, tangling, tightening. The creature thrashed, trying to break free. "Now!" Raven shouted. Garrett saw what she wanted, the floor panel, already loose from decades of neglect, directly beneath the stalker's right side. He slammed his boot into it. The panel buckled, supports beneath giving way. The stalker's legs crashed through, sinking to mid-joint, off balance, tangled, immobilized. Raven climbed onto its back, 700 pounds of Vraxian warrior in full armor, using the creature's own bulk against it. She positioned herself carefully, armor plates digging into scales for purchase. Then she channeled her entire mass into an overhead slam, driving her fists down with the full force of her weight and strength combined. The stalker's spine snapped with a sound like breaking branches. Silence crashed over them. The creature twitched once, twice, then went still. Raven slid off the corpse, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking again, but this time from adrenaline, not fear. She looked at her hands, at the dead predator, back at her hands. I just killed for my own survival. Her voice was barely above a whisper. First time I wasn't ordering someone else to do it. First time it was my plan, my execution, my hands. Garrett climbed onto the corpse, examining it. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever watched. She looked up at something like hope flickering in her jeweled eyes. Terrifying and impressive. He found what he was looking for, a seam in the scales near the hindquarters. You just took down 1,200 pounds through planning and courage. That's not nothing. She bent to grab the stalker's tail. Even dead, it required effort to move that much mass. Together they hauled it backward through the corridor, leaving a trail of disturbed rust. I've been combat trained my whole life, she said as they worked. Just relied on pheromones to make others fight for me. Forgot I could do it myself. You remembered fast. He grunted with effort. That's what matters. The processing chamber had 3 functional heating elements and adequate ventilation. Garrett set to work with a piece of sharp metal, butchering with surprising efficiency. He'd done this before, field dressing kills in hostile territory when resupply wasn't an option. The hindquarters are best, he explained as he worked. Highest protein density, least contamination from digestive organs. We'll cook it thoroughly. Undercity predators carry parasites. Raven watched him work with an expression that shifted between fascination and something warmer. An hour later, they sat in the chamber eating roasted stalker meat from improvised metal plates. It was tough and gamey, but edible. More importantly, it was calories, energy, survival. Raven ate like someone starving, which she was. Color returned to her violet skin, spreading from her core outward like watching a flower bloom in time-lapse. Her hands stopped shaking. The living tattoo settled into a steady pulse. After the third portion, she slowed down, chewing thoughtfully. This is the first time in 70 years someone has provided for me, she said quietly. Garrett tore another piece of meat. First time for everything. No, you don't understand. She set down her plate. I'm the Empress. People bring me tribute, offerings, gifts. But that's fear and obligation. Terror dressed up as devotion. You hunted for me, risked yourself, planned, executed. Her amethyst eyes found his. You treated me like someone worth protecting. You are worth protecting, am I? I've spent 73 years controlling people through chemistry. Without my pheromones, what am I? Garrett finished his meal before responding. He wiped his hands on his pants, buying time to choose words carefully. You're someone learning who they are without a crutch. That takes more courage than ruling through chemical control ever did. He stood, checking the chamber's exit points. Get some rest. We move in 4 hours. I want to scout the area while you digest. She caught his wrist as he passed, her massive hand engulfing his arm, but the grip was gentle. Thank you. He nodded once and disappeared into the shadows. Alone in the chamber, Raven ate the rest of her meal slowly, savoring each bite. Not because it was delicious, though her starving body sang at the protein and fat. She savored it because, for the first time in her life, food tasted like care instead of duty. Like someone had chosen to provide for her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because she mattered to them as something more than an empress or a goddess or a weapon. She finished eating and leaned back against the wall, armor scraping metal. The emergency lighting painted everything amber. Water dripped somewhere. The Undercity breathed around her, and for the first time in 73 years, Raven felt something other than boredom. She felt alive. Garrett returned an hour later, moving quietly through the shadows. She dozed off, he realized, her breathing deep and even. He stood watching her for a moment, this massive being who'd spent a lifetime alone in crowds, and something in his chest tightened. Then her eyes opened, focusing on him immediately. You should have woken me if something was wrong. Nothing's wrong, he sat down across from her. But I found something while scouting. Overheard guards talking near the palace's lower levels. What did they say? He hesitated. This was going to hurt her, and he hated that. But she deserved truth, even when it cut. The Chancellor, Thane. There's something personal driving him. Something about his past. What about it? Fragments of conversation. Garrett chose his words carefully. His sister. 30 years ago. Something happened involving your pheromones. She died because of them. Raven went very still, the pulse beneath her skin dimming. I don't have all the details, he continued, but it explains why he built the dampener, why he wants to end biological control so badly. It's not just political philosophy for him, it's personal. I don't even know her name. Raven's voice was hollow. When we face him, he's going to tell you. Garrett leaned forward, and you need to be ready to hear it, ready to face what your power has cost people you never even knew existed. Her hands came up to her face, and he saw tears tracking down Violet's skin. How many? How many lives have I ruined without even knowing their names? I don't know, he said honestly. But we're going to make sure it never happens again. That's what matters now. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Then, how far to the surface? 300 meters, vertical. There's a cargo lift shaft with a maintenance ladder. He pulled out a piece of metal he'd etched a crude map onto. Here. The ladder's built for Vraxian workers, so the spacing should work for you. For me, he shrugged. It'll be harder. 300 meters. She looked at her hands, still trembling, slightly from emotion. In this armor, we don't have a choice. The coronation is in. He checked his mental clock. 14 hours. We need to be there. Why? Her eyes met his. Why risk everything to stop Thane? You could disappear into the Undercity, wait until this blows over. Find a way off planet, because he's wrong. Garrett stood, offering his hand. She took it, letting him help her up, even though she didn't need the assistance. You're not nothing without your pheromones. You just took down 1,200 pounds through planning and courage. You chose to jump down a waste chute rather than submit. You're learning to care about others, making their own choices. He squeezed her hand. That's worth fighting for. She looked down at their joined hands, his so small in hers, and something shifted in her expression. Hope, maybe, or determination, or both. Then let's go, she said, together. They moved through the Undercity, following Garrett's mental map toward the cargo lift shaft. The journey took 2 hours of careful navigation, avoiding patrol routes he'd memorized from the scouting run. Twice they heard guards in the distance and melted into shadows until the footsteps faded. Raven moved with surprising quiet for someone in full armor, her combat training showing through now that she wasn't relying on pheromones to do the work for her. The shaft opened before them like a wound in the earth, a vertical tunnel 300 meters high and 20 across. Emergency lighting ran up one side, creating a ladder of amber light that disappeared into darkness above. The maintenance ladder was welded to the wall, metal rungs spaced for Vraxian reach, each one thick enough to support their weight but far enough apart that it would be a climb measured in pain. Garrett stood at the base, looking up. The top was barely visible, a circle of light that seemed impossibly distant. We're climbing that, Raven said flatly. Yes, in my armor. Unless you want to leave it behind, he looked at her. But that armor saved your life twice already today. She considered the 400 pounds of Aureate shell, the defensive systems woven into the filigree, the heritage it represented. I'll keep the armor. They began to climb. The first 100 meters weren't terrible. Garrett found a rhythm, hand over hand, testing each rung before committing his weight. The spacing was awkward, forcing him to stretch farther than was comfortable, but he'd climbed worse. His arms burned with effort, shoulders protesting, but he'd learned in Detroit to parse pain into categories. This was the kind that meant work, not injury. Keep going. Raven climbed below him, her larger size making the spacing less challenging, but her armor's weight was evident in every movement. Each pull upward required visible effort, muscles straining, breath coming harder. At 200 meters, Garrett's shoulders were screaming. His hands had started bleeding where rough metal wore through calluses he'd built up over years of military service. At 250, his vision started graying at the edges, exhaustion and elevation combining into something that felt like drowning in air. He kept climbing. At 270, Raven slipped. It happened without warning. A rung that looked solid gave way under her weight, corroded from the inside by decades of moisture and neglect. She dropped a meter before catching the next rung, the impact jarring through her entire body. Her gasp of pain echoed in the shaft, sharp and involuntary. You all right? Garrett called down, not stopping his own climb. Fine. Her voice was tight. Keep going. But he heard the lie in it, heard the strain. 20 meters later, she slipped it again. This time the rung didn't break. Her injured arm, the shoulder she'd wrenched in the first fall, simply couldn't hold. She fell backward, the weight of her armor pulling her from the ladder. Garrett moved on pure instinct. No thought, no calculation, just the muscle memory of 1,000 training scenarios that said when your teammate falls, you catch them. He dropped one level, hooked his leg around a rung, and grabbed. His hand caught the strap of her armor just below the pauldron. The impact nearly ripped his arm from its socket. Raven's 15 feet in 700 pounds plus 400 pounds of armor became a pendulum with Garrett as the anchor point. His shoulder popped, not quite dislocating, but close enough that white light exploded across his vision. His leg cramped around the rung, muscles locked in a spasm of effort that turned his thigh into a bar of screaming iron. He held on because letting go meant watching her fall 300 meters. Letting go wasn't an option. "Let go," Raven shouted up at him. "You can't hold me. You'll die." The words came out as a grunt forced through clenched teeth. "Grab the ladder. I can't reach. Swing your legs." "Grab." She tried. Her armored boots scraped against the shaft wall, searching for purchase. The motion sent fresh spikes of agony through Garrett's shoulder. On the third swing, her good hand caught a rung. Then her injured arm, screaming protest but doing it anyway, found another. She was secure. Garrett released her strap. Pain washed over him in waves, his arm hanging useless, legs still cramped. But she was safe. That mattered more than anything. Then his grip failed. His injured shoulder couldn't maintain hold anymore. Tendons torn, fingers going numb. He started to fall backward, 300 meters of empty air waiting below. Raven's hand shot up, grabbed his tactical harness, and hauled him against the ladder with strength that came from 700 pounds of desperate determination. "I've got you." Her voice was fierce. They held there for a long moment, both breathing hard, both understanding what had just happened. They had saved each other, not hero and damsel, equals supporting each other through impossible circumstances. "We hold each other." Garrett managed through the pain. "Always," she said. They climbed the last 20 meters side by side, moving together through exhaustion and injury. When they reached the exit hatch, Garrett used a maintenance key he'd lifted from a guard during a scouting run. The lock clicked open. They emerged into a service corridor lit by harsh fluorescent lights that hurt their dark-adapted eyes. They collapsed on the floor, both of them, breathing like they'd just run a marathon. Garrett's shoulder was swelling, already turning purple beneath his shirt. Raven's arm hung at an awkward angle, hyperextended and inflamed. "We're a mess," she said. "We're alive." Garrett probed his shoulder gently, painful but functional. "Give me your arm." She extended it hesitantly. He examined it with practiced hands, finding the damage. Hyperextension, not torn. "You need ice and rest." "We don't have time for rest." "No." He pulled off his shirt, already soaked with sweat and blood, and tore it into strips. "We don't, but we can stabilize it." As he worked, fashioning a crude support brace, her good hand touched his face. The contact was gentle, a massive palm cupping his cheek with unexpected tenderness. "Thank you for catching me. Always." The word came out before he could stop it, and they both heard what it meant. Not just this time, not just today, always. She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to move away. He didn't. Her forehead touched his, the gesture of intimacy from their first real connection through transparent aluminum. They stayed like that for a blinded moment, breathing together, grounding each other in the simple fact of survival. "We should move," Garrett said finally, though neither pulled away immediately. When they finally stood, something fundamental had shifted between them. They'd entered the shaft as fugitives. They emerged as something else. Partners, equals. Two people who'd literally held each other up when the world tried to drag them down. "The throne room is 20 levels above," Raven said, testing her braced arm. "Thane's coronation starts in 3 hours. Garrett sketched a rough map on the wall with a piece of charcoal. "Servants' entrance here. You know the corridors, every inch. 70 years, remember? Guards, 30 minimum, plus the entire court. We'll be outnumbered 50 to 1. I've had worse odds." He looked at her, this woman who'd spent 73 years alone and was just learning what it meant to have someone fight beside her. "Ready?" She interlaced her fingers with his, the size difference pronounced but somehow right. "Ready." They moved through the service corridors, heading up. Behind them, the undercity settled back into rust and shadow. Ahead, a throne waited. A choice waited. A future waited. Together they climbed toward it. The servants' entrance was guarded by two Vraxian soldiers in Thane's new silver livery. They never saw Garrett coming. He emerged from the shadows like smoke given form, moving with the quiet that comes from 1,000 patrols through hostile territory. Two precise strikes to temple pressure points. Not lethal, but absolutely incapacitating. The guards dropped without a sound, ceremonial spears clattering on stone. Raven caught the weapons before they hit the ground, her reflexes sharp now that adrenaline had burned through the last of her exhaustion. Energy rifles, military grade, fully charged. She tossed one to Garrett. Can you shoot? Does the sun rise? They moved through the servants' corridors, following routes that Raven knew intimately from 70 years of palace life. The sounds of coronation ceremony filtered through walls thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment. Thane's voice, amplified by acoustics, rolling out in waves of false authority. The crowd's forced applause, hollow and mechanical. At the final door before the throne room proper, they paused. Raven pressed her hand against the ornate metal, feeling vibrations through the material. Once we go through, there's no retreat. 30 guards minimum. The entire court. We'll be outnumbered 50-1. I've held worse positions. Garrett checked his rifle charge. She looked at him, really looked at him. This human who'd fought for her, hunted for her, caught her when she fell 300 meters up. His shoulder was ruined, wrapped in improvised bandaging. His hands were bleeding. His face showed exhaustion that went bone deep. But his eyes were clear, focused, ready. If we die. She started. We won't. He cut her off. But if you're about to say something sentimental, save it for after. I want to hear it when we're not about to assault a coronation. A smile touched her lips despite everything. We're not dying today. Today I take back my throne. We take it back, he corrected. Together. They burst through the door. The throne room erupted into chaos. Thane stood at the throne's base, the crystalline dampener mounted on his staff like a scepter of stolen divinity. The court filled the chamber, hundreds of nobles and dignitaries in their formal regalia. Guards lined the walls in silver armor, weapons at rest because no one expected an attack during the coronation of a new chancellor. Holographic displays broadcast the scene to billions across the hegemony, capturing the moment everything changed. Every head turned. The false empress. Thane's voice cracked with shock, the careful control he'd maintained shattering like glass. Kill them! Kill them both! Guards surged forward, a wave of silver armor and energy weapons coming to lethal charge. Garrett dropped to one knee, rifle up, and his first 3 shots were precision targeting, not killing shots. He hit weapons instead of wielders, energy packs exploding in showers of sparks that sent soldiers diving for cover. Disable? Not destroy. Give them a chance to make better choices later. Raven charged. She was a golden avalanche, 700 pounds of Vraxian warrior moving with purpose. She caught the first guard with her shoulder, the impact sending him flying across marble hard enough to crack ribs. The second tried to block with his rifle. She snapped it like kindling and threw him into a third. Garrett covered her advance, moving laterally along the chamber wall, firing in controlled bursts. His shoulder screamed with each recoil, but pain was just data. The body sends signals. The mind interprets them. A guard flanked right, trying to get an angle. Garrett pivoted, dropped his rifle, grabbed the guard's weapon mid-swing and redirected the momentum into a marble column. The guard hit hard. Garrett reclaimed his rifle before the body finished sliding down the pillar. Raven, you're the center, Garrett called. Draw them to you. Her armor was designed for this. Brass protection dispersing heat and impact. She became a moving fortress, drawing fire while Garrett flanked and picked off guards who overextended trying to get around her. They moved like partners who trained together for years instead of days, her creating space, him exploiting it. Court members scattered, nobles diving for exits. The ceremony descended into pandemonium. Thane tried to flee toward the royal balcony, his escape route planned long before today. Raven saw him moving. Garrett, she shouted, I need you on that throne. She grabbed him by the tactical harness, sun metal enhanced strength making him weightless. She spun once for momentum and threw him. Garrett sailed through the air in a perfect arc, 40 feet horizontal and 15 vertical. The world slowed down to individual frames, the throne rushing closer. Thane's shocked face. He twisted mid-flight, grabbed the throne's armrest, and used it to redirect his trajectory. Landed in a roll directly in Thane's path, rifle coming up before his momentum fully stopped. You should be dead. Thane stumbled backward, the staff with its crystalline dampener raised like a shield. Yeah, Garrett kicked the staff from Thane's hands. I get that a lot. The staff clattered across marble. The crystalline sphere shattered with a sound like breaking glass, 1,000 harmonics collapsing into silence. The dampening field died. Immediately the dread returned. Raven's royal command pheromones flooded the room like a tidal wave of chemical authority. Guards dropped their weapons as if they'd suddenly become too heavy to hold. Nobles froze mid-step, eyes glazing over with familiar submission. The court's resistance evaporated under the weight of biology they couldn't fight. Except Thane. His cybernetic implants sparked uselessly at his temples, trying and failing to resist the pheromone onslaught. But he didn't kneel. His augmented mind fought back, buying him seconds of clarity that most beings couldn't achieve. You don't understand. His voice carried desperation now instead of triumph. I'm saving them from tyranny. By staging a coup and executing prisoners? Garrett kept the rifle trained on him. Thane's augmented eyes blazed. This isn't about power. This is about freedom. Freedom from biological slavery that's lasted 73 years. Raven walked through the frozen court, each footfall echoing in the sudden silence. She'd won. The pheromones were working, bringing everyone back under her control. The familiar feedback loop was beginning. Power feeding devotion. Devotion feeding power. 73 years of this. She could feel it pulling at her, seductive and easy. Just let the chemistry do its work. It felt hollow. She stopped at the base of the throne, looking up at the seat she'd occupied for 7 decades. Then she looked at Thane, at the desperation in his augmented eyes. You lost someone. His face went pale. How did you? Tell me. Her voice was soft. Tell me who I took from you. Thane's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Garrett thought he might attack despite the rifle. Then the words came out, forced through decades of grief. Alara, my sister, a scientist. 20 years she spent it researching a plague cure. 20 years of her life dedicated to saving millions. Raven's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. You commanded her. Thane pulled a small holographic projector from his robes with shaking hands. The image flickered to life between them. A young Vraxian woman, slender like Thane, with kind eyes. Prove your loyalty, you said. Under your pheromones, she smiled while she burned it all. 20 years of work. The cure for a plague that's killed billions. Gone. The hologram shifted. The same woman, but the kindness in her eyes had been replaced by horror. A note in her handwriting appeared. I wasn't myself. She stole my will. I burned the cure for nothing. I can't live with what I've done. The hologram showed a body. Thane's sister, dead by her own hand. The court murmured even through their glazed submission, confusion rippling outward like waves from a thrown stone. Raven's hands came up to her face. She stopped, started again. I don't even remember that day. The admission fell like an executioner's blade. Thane stared at her, his augmented brain processing implications. You don't. Decades of calculations collapsed. You've done this so many times you don't even remember the individual victims. How many others? Raven's voice broke. How many lives did I ruin without even knowing? How many people did I force to destroy themselves? Thane's voice rose to fill the throne room. It doesn't matter if you remember. The system itself is evil. You were born with a weapon that strips free will from every being in your presence. That's not power. That's slavery. Garrett spoke then, rifle still trained, but his voice carrying across the space. You're right that she ruled through chemistry, but you're trying to kill her for being born with a weapon she didn't choose. She never asked for this power. I'm killing the weapon itself, Thane shot back. The person is irrelevant. The pheromones are the crime. Raven looked at her hands, gold claws catching light. These hands had signed execution orders, commanded fleets, ruled 1,000 worlds. But had they ever truly chosen anything? Or had she been a prisoner of her own biology, forced to be empress because her body chemistry demanded it? She looked at Garrett, bloodied and exhausted and trusting her to make the right choice. looked at Thane, grief-stricken and righteous in his way, looked at the court, glazed and waiting for her command like puppets with cut strings just waiting to be picked up again. The pheromones surged through her, autonomic and powerful. All she had to do was let them work. Rule like she always had, the easy path, the familiar path. Raven ascended the throne steps slowly, each one a decision. At the top, she turned to face her empire. The court stared with devotion that wasn't real, could never be real because you couldn't command genuine loyalty any more than you could command the tide. She felt the pull of power, the seductive whisper that said this was who she was, who she'd always been. 73 years of muscle memory screaming at her to just let the chemistry do its work. Instead, she closed her eyes and did something she'd never done before, something she'd never even known was possible. She willed the pheromones off. It was like holding her breath underwater, an act of pure suppression fighting against every biological imperative. Her body fought back, trying to release the chemicals that had defined her existence. But she'd learned something in the Undercity. She'd learned that she was more than her biology. That choice mattered more than chemistry. The dread faded like morning fog under sunlight. The chemical weight pressing down on the court evaporated. Eyes cleared. Confusion rippled through the assembly like a wave. I am Ravenna Ashcroft. Her voice carried across the throne room without chemical amplification, just the natural acoustics in her own will. Empress of the Vraxian hegemony. I ruled you through royal command pheromones for 73 years. The court stared. That ends today. Silence. Absolute silence. Thane's augmented brain struggled to process what he was witnessing. Garrett lowered his rifle slightly, watching her with something like awe. I will not command your love. Raven descended the steps, moving toward Garrett, toward partnership instead of power. I will not steal your loyalty. I will not reach into your minds and make you smile while you destroy yourselves. She stopped beside Garrett, equals standing together. From today forward, I rule by choice, yours and mine. The court remained frozen, but now from shock instead of chemistry. This man. She looked at Thane directly, tried to prove I'm nothing without pheromones. She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with him. A shocking gesture, an empress kneeling. He was wrong about that. But he was right about something more important. She took a breath that shook with emotion. Biological rule without consent is tyranny. I've been a tyrant for 73 years. I've destroyed lives I don't even remember. I made your sister burn her life's work and smile while doing it. I can't undo that. I can't even remember doing it. Tears streamed down her face now, and that's worse. That's unforgivable. Thane's augmented eyes were wet, decades of grief finally breaking through. But killing me won't bring Alara back. Raven reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. Help me build a system where no one can do what I did. Help me end biological slavery. Let your sister's death mean something. Let it be the catalyst that frees billions. Thane broke. The sound that came out of him was raw, primal, decades of pain released all at once. He collapsed and Raven caught him, held him while he wept for a sister lost 30 years ago. I wanted you to suffer, he sobbed. I have suffered. Raven's voice was gentle. 73 years alone, not even knowing the harm I caused. But we can stop others from suffering now, together. She stood slowly, helping Thane to his feet, and addressed the court. You may serve me. You may challenge me. You may even leave. But you will never, never again be chemically compelled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then movement. An elderly Vraxian noblewoman, matriarch Vera, stepped forward. She'd served for 100 years, seen 3 empresses before Raven. She looked at Raven with eyes that were clear, present, choosing. She dropped to one knee. Not from pheromones, not from fear, from choice. You just became worthy of the crown, Ravenna Ashcroft. Another noble followed, then another. Within moments, 70% of the court was kneeling freely, deliberately, offering loyalty that was genuine for the first time in their lives. But not everyone. 3 nobles remained standing. A Krillith Hive representative spoke. We need time to decide, to consult our collectives, to understand what this means. Raven's smile was genuine, free from the weight of godhood. Take it. Take all the time you need. That's your right now. That's the entire point. Her hands trembled. This was real. This was different. This was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. She felt Garrett's touch on her elbow, grounding her. You did it, he said quietly. We did it, she corrected. I couldn't have without you showing me I could be more than chemistry. The throne room settled into a new kind of order. Guards lowered their weapons, uncertain what happened next in a world without chemical compulsion. Nobles whispered among themselves, testing the boundaries of their newly returned free will. Thane stood beside the throne, no longer enemy or servant, but something else entirely, an ally in building something new. Ambassador Hayes emerged from the crowd where she'd been watching with cleared eyes. She approached Garrett, drew herself to attention despite her civilian status, and saluted. Marine to Marine, Mr. Thorne, you did what our entire diplomatic corps couldn't. You showed them we're equals. Garrett returned the salute, shoulder protesting. Just applied the principles, ma'am. Survived long enough to complete the mission. Hayes turned to Raven. Earth formally recognizes your reformed government, Empress, though we'll need to renegotiate every treaty. Everything built on the old system is void now. Good, Raven said. Build them on consent this time, on genuine partnership. One question. Hayes glanced between them. Mr. Thorne's diplomatic status, he's been sentenced to death under your laws. Pardoned, Raven said immediately, and offered permanent residency as. She hesitated, looking at Garrett. What's your title? Partner works. Garrett said, no hierarchy implied. Partner, Raven smiled. I can work with that. The three nobles who'd hesitated approached. The Krillith representative spoke again. We've discussed among ourselves. If you can surrender godhood, we can offer trust. They knelt. Not from chemistry, from choice. The coronation would have to wait, but the revolution had already begun. 3 days later, the amphitheater filled again. But this time, every seat was occupied by choice. No chemical compulsion. No dread pressing down like atmospheric pressure. People came because they wanted to see what happened next in a hegemony learning to operate on consent. Garrett stood in the audience wearing formal clothes the palace tailor had produced. His shoulder was healing, wrapped in nanites that accelerated tissue repair. Around him, the court assembled with eyes that were clear, present, choosing to be here. Raven wore new armor, still golden, still magnificent, but lighter, more practical. Her jade mane was braided with silver thread, renewal woven into her appearance. The crown placed on her head was simpler than the old one, elegant instead of ostentatious, earned instead of inherited. The ceremony was brief. She spoke about duty without divinity, about consent without compulsion, about the long road ahead. The court applauded not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because her words resonated with the promise of something better. Afterward, Garrett found himself on the royal balcony overlooking the capital. Sunset painted the sky in shades of violet and gold. The city sprawled below, lights beginning to illuminate as darkness approached. Behind him, footsteps. Raven's approach, heavier than human but controlled. She joined him at the railing. The Terran ambassador is demanding your return, she said. Earth wants to present you with a medal for diplomatic excellence. Garrett snorted. I pinned you with a knife. That's the opposite of diplomacy, but it started this. She gestured at the city, the changes rippling outward. You changed at everything. We changed everything. She turned to face him fully. Do you want to go back to Earth? The question hung between them, weighted with 3 days of survival and 7 decades of loneliness ending. Do you want me to stay? I'm asking what you want. Her voice was soft. First time I've cared about someone else's choice in, well, ever. I don't command you. I don't even request it. I'm asking, I choose to stay, he said. Not because you command, because you asked. Because partnership means more than orders. Her smile transformed her face. My people lack words for equal partnerships. We'll have to invent one. I can work with that. She lifted him gently to the railing, eye level now, completely undignified. Court will gossip. Let them. They're free to gossip now. She leaned in slowly, asking permission with every movement. He nodded consent. Their kiss bridged height and evolution, tentative then certain, filled with promise. When they parted, both were smiling. The council wants to make you prince consort, she said. Formal title, legal authority. He shook his head. I'm not here for crowns. What are you here for? To make sure you don't face this alone. To tell you when you're wrong. To hold you when the world tries to break you. Her laugh was soft. The council won't like partner as official designation. Then they'll learn creativity. You're rewriting every law anyway. Add one more. Leaders choose their own support without prescribed hierarchy. She leaned her forehead against his. First decree, partnership requires no titles, just choice. Second decree, whoever tells me I'm wrong gets immunity from retaliation. He grinned. I'll use that a lot. I'm counting on it. What are you thinking, she asked, echoing their first real conversation. That you've been goddess, empress, tyrant, she traced his jawline. And now you're learning to be more. 3 seconds to pin me, he said. 3 days to earn trust. 73 years you waited for freedom. Best education of my life. They kissed again, deeper, the city lights spreading below like stars brought to earth. The broadcast captured it, this moment of genuine connection in an empire built on chemical control. Raven looked out over her domain, no longer bored, no longer lonely, finally free. Beside her stood someone who'd chosen to stay not because he had to, but because she'd asked. 3 seconds had changed everything. And now they had a lifetime to see where choice could lead. The galaxy turned. The stars watched. In the heart of the Vraxian hegemony, a new story was beginning. Written not in pheromones or power, but in the deliberate choice of two people to face the universe as equals. The revolution had started with 3 seconds of violence. It continued with 3 days of survival, and it would endure through 73 years of liberation, one choice at a time. On the balcony under alien stars, a new empire was being born, built on consent instead of compulsion, on partnership instead of power, on love that was chosen, not chemically induced. Raven and Garrett stood together, and the universe watched something unprecedented. A goddess who'd learned to kneel. A human who'd taught her she could stand without chemistry. Two beings proving that the strongest bonds were forged through choice. The night deepened. The city below hummed with newly free voices making decisions. And high above, two people discovered that freedom tasted better than any power ever could. Together. By choice. Always.